Fel's going to kick off, but here's what I'll suggest, right? So again, this is, in my opinion, the most important part of the day is obviously, Fel, Tony, and David, and Wade, right? These guys that have come with a lot of great material, right? And this includes the SE community. Ask a lot of questions. It has to be engaging, right? I want the computers down, right? And I want your full attention on what is here. We can't multitask as men. It doesn't happen. If you're looking at something else, nothing else is going in the ears. I want your eyes up here, right? I want you guys fully engaged. I want you to stop. No question's a dumb question, right? Stop and ask, right? Again, Fel's taking the most complicated things like DevOps. I mean, what are we seeing? We're seeing from a world that was a data center with servers that were just, very unique, identity stores all over the place, and we kind of solved that problem. To now there's all these other moving parts, identity stores that are out in the cloud. There's Kubernetes. You're hearing, we're past, Hadoop's an old word, but there's other things that are coming. Containerization, right? What does all this mean, and what kind of questions can we ask that allows us to have the guy on the other end of the phone, the gal on the other end of the phone, to stop and say, wait a minute here, you just said something, key management, you just said something that really, we have a project for that, around privilege or something with Kubernetes that natively they don't have, right? Fel's the expert at sort of stopping somebody in a tracks, getting them to kind of think and go, maybe you should come in and show that. Because that sounds like a hot topic that we consistently have, in our roundtables in the last, year that we can't really figure out. Perfect. Can I come in at 3 o'clock on Thursday and do a technical briefing, right? And then you bring your engineer in, you guys go in and you pitch, and then you get the wow factor, and then next they're asking for an evaluation, right? And so that's what for so many years Fel has done so well to get us in a mindset that we can ask those questions to sort of turn the no's into a maybe, right? And that's the theme today, is to get you comfortable with when you dial the phone and you're going to hear naturally, no, I'm not interested. Why are you calling me, right? Well, hold it. You get a quick minute? Yes. What do you got? And in that minute, right, you can ask the right amount of questions to get the other person on the other end of the phone to pause and go, that's really interesting, and they start engaging, right? That's what I'm trying to create here, right? And Wade, again, thank you for everything you did. We're bringing in these, amazing folks to do some training here. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Fel. But again, let's engage, often.
Thanks, Fred. I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity, guys. You guys are my family, as you know. So this is it's great to be here to see you guys again. Spend some time last night, especially. I put these slides together, but honestly, I want this to be much more engaging, much more interactive, right? What I wanted to sort of at a high level, cover here is, right? We know cloud is exploding. We sort of know that privilege is sort of synonymous now with password vaults, right? How do we position Centrify, right? Those are kind of the two big themes that I think most of you are probably seeing across your customers, right? So what angles could we take, right? How can we navigate the customer? As Kurt said, to latch onto a specific project, latch onto an initiative, and then I wanted to also just cover some key customer wins. I think the one thing we don't do really well here at Centrify is talk about our customer wins and share them and be able to kind of hold each other accountable for being able to repeat those wins, right? Why did we close account A? What was the pain? What was the business driver? Why did we win, right? And just making sure we can easily, as we talk to customers, oh, by the way, customer A did this. Here's why they did it. Here's the impact it had, right? And I think we need to, off the top of our heads, have at least 3 or 4 of these. Right? Different examples, right? Different ways we won, different situations that we were successful in, and just being able to just, fluidly, just be able to speak to it, right? And I bet if we kind of, go around the room right now and ask a couple, hey, tell me one key win that, one key win story and why we won. I think most people would struggle with that, right? You probably stutter a little bit, and you won't be as crisp as you need to with it. So, an action item I would have for you guys is just to make sure, assign 3, 4 key wins. Make sure people can repeat that story like this, and on the phone, in a briefing, as you do your demos, things like that to customers. So I'll cover some of these today, and I'm hoping that others just, oh yeah, here's why I want this account, or here's why I want this account, and maybe we can make that a little bit more interactive. So I call these angles, right? Some of these are easier to understand than others, right? So bear with me as I go through these, but I call these angles that we can use to penetrate the customer or expand inside of a customer for an existing customer. Share. Let's see here. Share my screen. PowerPoint wants to let me exit it. Okay, cool. Thank you. So angle number one, right? I call this a simplified password vaults, right? Again, this one's a little confusing, so just hopefully we could kind of talk through it. But if you look at what a password vault is doing, right? It's, you know, ours included, right? It's basically managing accounts that exist on different systems, right? So essentially, if I take out all the, you know, a Windows machines or Linux machines, right, or the network devices, I have to go to each and every single one of those devices and bring those accounts into the vault, right? That's kind of step one, right? You know, there's discovery that can help do that. There's a couple different ways to go about it. But what if I were to, instead of having to go to each account, each different system and bring those accounts under management, what if I were to centralize the accounts first and then manage the privileges from there, right? So Centrify can actually do that. So imagine all the Linux systems, Unix systems you have out there. You have a root account, you have local accounts, right? You know, 6, 7, 10 different accounts per system. But what if instead I used one account, say in Active Directory, and manage that account, and then give that account the privileges across the different systems instead, right? Centrify can do this really, really, really well. And we actually have a lot of customers that are doing this today using Centrify along with their password vault, right? So the message here is, instead of granting people access to a bunch of local accounts and having to worry about managing those local accounts, bringing them under management, rotating their password, instead, we can centralize the account in Active Directory first, right? Manage the account with our vault so that we rotate the password, manage access to the account. But then we use Centrify to grant the privileges to the account, okay? It's a little difficult to comprehend. I'll show you kind of an example of what this looks like in a moment. But we have so many customers doing this today, and we don't talk enough about this scenario, right? I'll talk about JP Morgan Chase in a moment, but there's just a lot of customers doing this at the moment, where Centrify is the privilege management solution for the privileged accounts, right? So typically the password vault projects, you know, pretty visible, they have a lot of budget, you know, kind of top of mind, right, when it comes to the security projects and the budgets and things like that. So we want to try to align with that project, that's right? So they've chosen a password vault, great. We can help you be successful. We can help you, you know, deliver a quicker return on investment with that password vault, right? We can make things much more secure, right? So we essentially align with the existing password vault implementation as opposed to fight against it or compete against it, right? Oh, they have a password vault already. I'm done, right? There's no way that I can position and sell Centrify. You know, that's just simply not true, right? So, you know, really, and we know this because we have both a vault and an access control solution, right? The two together is the right solution, right? But what you can do is you can position their existing password vault with Centrify as the better approach, right? So, you know, the way we do this, again, is we would consolidate identities, right? So, kind of the one term or two words that we use for the customer is, we can help you consolidate your identities, Mr. Customer, right? Well, I have a password vault already, great. That's not helping you consolidate identities, Mr. Customer. Centrify can, right? So that would be the way I would position that, right? Oh, we already have CyberArk, that's great. You know, so you're managing privileged account password, that's awesome, right? You know, it's good, really good to hear. But we're actually in the identity consolidation business. And in fact, we can help you simplify your implementation of your vault. Does that kind of make sense? Right. Good. So let me, you know, I know this is super basic, but I think for the sales guys in the room, right? I want to just show you, again, very basic. Of course, it's timed out, so we'll log back in. Do you guys know how privileges are managed on with like a Windows machine or a Unix machine at all? Because I feel like context is missing sometimes, right? So I think if you understand the problem really well, then you can speak to how we solve the problem much more confidently, right? So I always kind of try to focus on these foundations, right? So let me log in here real quick. Let's see, I think I can do it with. Sure, that's not working. Let's see, this one's open still. Let's try it one more time. That's failing.
Which system are you trying to launch from?
Just SC Lab, one of them basically.
One of the SE Lab workstations or server?
Server.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is in. Anyway, why don't we? I'm not sure why that's not working. It was working. So we go.
Block out ex-employees.
What's up? Yeah. You go. Anyway, so
Just like I was admitting to show you.
that's right.
Security, by the way.
There you go. Security through obscurity. See one of these words instead. So I've actually stolen spots at least. Okay. So you have to understand sort of the issue, right? Is you have an account, and the way the account gets privileges is locally on each machine, right? So even with a Windows machine that's joined to Active Directory, yes, you can use an Active Directory account, but the way that account gets privileges is how? Locally on each individual single machine. There's a bunch of local groups that you add the account to, and that's what gives the account privileges. So although the account is centrally managed, the privileges are still managed locally on every single server. How do you report on this? How do you attest that nobody's gone around the security that has been implemented on the system? These are the kinds of questions, these are the kinds of things you should be discussing with your customers, right? So although you have a password ball, how do you know that people are not going around the ball? How do you know that the account has just the privileges that it needs? How do you know that people have not altered those privileges, right? And those are the kinds of conversations hopefully you can have, especially on the critical machines, right? Critical servers, etc. That this is where Centrify can help. How? We can, and then again, consolidate identities and manage privileges centrally. So you don't have to manage privileges locally in every single system. You don't have to attest locally the access in every single system. That's what we do, right? And ultimately, we can hopefully show them something like this.
And I think you do a good job on the hotel analogy and some of the apartment analogies, like the house and that. Again, Fel, we'll go over that later, but there's really good analogies that breaks down what he's saying, and then he'll touch on.
And kind of the proof, right, of this is, so we have this really nice report here. Hopefully I connect with this, we'll see. That was a second ago. But you can show them this, right? And, the SEs can show it, of course. Definitely something broke. But basically, this report will show us individually which users have access to which system, right? And what privileges they have. So here's the outlook. Here's the future statement, right? Here are all the privileged accounts. Here's all the access that they have, right? Here's why they have the access even, right? This is probably one of the first two things hopefully an SE shows in a tech briefing, right? But I would even take that report and I would send it to a customer by email. Hey, great talking to you today, Mr. Customer, right? Really appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully see us real soon. You check in with your colleagues and availability, that's great. But here's just a screenshot, right, of a sample report, just to give you more context as to what I was talking about on the phone, right? Let them see it, let them visually see what the end goal is, right? So that's the first angle. Does that kind of make sense? Any questions?
Fel, does that report show the AD account and the local accounts?
What it shows is the AD account and the privileges that that account has.
Which transfer to the local accounts tied to that AD account when they're going to the local boxes?
Yeah, so basically the way to think about it is, instead of the local account, I give your account, your privileged account, right? So in this world, instead of letting Tom log on as root, instead of letting Tom log on as administrator, I'm going to give, and every customer does this by the way, I'm going to give Tom a different account called Tom Admin. So now, what you're going to do is you're going to log into those systems as Tom Admin. And then your privileges are tied to Tom Admin. Yeah, I'm not giving you root, I'm not giving you the administrator account, right? You can still have full access. Doesn't mean you can't have full-blown access to the machine, but now everything that you do is tied back to Tom Admin. And instead of having to manage, well, Tom Admin needs rights to 25 root accounts on 25 different servers, right? I just make sure Tom Admin has the access to those 25 servers, and that's it. I don't have to worry about this local account to human mapping exercise that needs to occur, right, before I can actually give people the right access to things, right? So that's the big difference, right? And anybody that's implemented a password vault, ours included, that's the most difficult part of any password vault implementation, right? I can bring the accounts in, that's awesome, that's great. Now what? I gotta now figure out which groups of users need access to which groups of local accounts for every single system that I have in the environment. That's hard work, That's, when you hear, TD Ameritrade, deployed CyberArk 40% only in 3 years. This is why it takes a long time to deploy and implement these products, right? This is why the analogy I always use is if you have a messy closet, right? What do, right? You could go to a container store and buy a bunch of stuff and try to organize it, or you can just get rid of all the shit that you have that you don't use, right? And then give it away. So the identity consolidation is cleaning the closet. Let's clean things up. I'm not using these things. Great. Let's donate these clothes. Right. That's kind of the analogy I use that sometimes works. Right. Tom, is a good question you asked there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right. And again, we have a ton of customers. I remember, was it BB&T we went to see down in? The guy was new, and he, we said hi, and he's like, "What's the difference between you and CyberArk?" And it's like, I'm like, hello, how are you? Nice to see you, right? And
The short answer is they suck.
right, and then we had to get into this, right? And actually, the other gentleman from their team was actually had to explain. Actually, the way we use this is in our Swift environment. Right. Swift that does the bank transfers and whatnot. He goes, yes, we use CyberArk, but actually the accounts in CyberArk, Centrify manages the privileges for. And the guy's like, what do you mean? Well, instead of, giving people root access, instead of having to manage local sudo files on each system, or instead of having to manage local admin groups on every server, Centrify actually manages the privileges of the privileged accounts vaulted in CyberArk. The guy's like, wow. I said, why do we do that? Well, so we don't have to locally manage the privileges on each individual system, right? And we can create a report very easily, which I was going to show you. That basically says, here are the privileges that these privileged accounts have.
There's got it up, man, I pulled it up real fast.
Yeah,
And
please,
you-
you can go on the Zoom and share it.
Go on the Zoom, yeah.
Go on the Zoom and I can give you access.
Gotta log into the Zoom real quick.
Yeah, let me know when you're in there. So let's talk a little bit about, maybe, I'll talk about JPMC and then we can switch over to, the demo and show some things. So, again, what are some of the benefits of this, right? It really is centralized identity and privilege management versus local identity and privilege management, right? CyberArk doesn't do anything with identity consolidation. CyberArk doesn't do anything with centralized privilege management. All they do is, in our vault, same way, any vault will have this problem, right? Essentially, they're just managing passwords, right? So you have to have that conversation with the customer.
So with the vault only, Fel, how would they provide that local, like what do they have to do to say administer current, to have this password to go onto these systems?
So in their vault, in our vault as well, right, I have to give, for that root account, for example, I have to say which groups of people can access that account, right? So typically what you do then is you start grouping these accounts together, right? The root account on the web servers, the root account on the database servers, or the Oracle accounts on the database server. And you create groups of accounts. And then you take groups of people and give them access to those groups of accounts, right? But that does nothing for managing the privileges of those accounts at all, right? How does the Oracle account get its privileges? That's locally defined in each box, right? So what JP Morgan Chase has done, we'll talk about more of this in a little bit, but they've taken the Oracle account, they've created an Active Directory account. They've given that account roles in Centrify so that they don't have to, on each individual database, worry about or grant the Oracle account the access that it needs, right? And again, BB&T is doing the same thing, TD Ameritrade is doing the same thing, and it's something I don't think we talk about often enough that we can help with, right? So it's the other kind of big benefit is better accountability, right? And the example I always try to use with customers in this case is how do you figure out who did what, right? It's almost like if you have a security camera at home, how do I figure out who did what? I gotta go back, replay the tape, and figure out at what time something happened. It's really difficult to do, right? So with us, because all the privileges are tied back to an actual human account, privileged human account, right, or admin account, basically it's really easy for me to figure out who did what. But if you are logging in as root to the machine or as administrator, I have to go back and I call it play detective, right? I use that line with customers, you have to go back and play detective and try to figure out, okay, the change happened as root, who had root at that time, and you got to work backwards and piece the clues together to figure out what actually happened. So with this model, there's also centralized identity, right, consolidation, privilege management, but also more accountability, right? So those are the big customer benefits.
Is CyberArk's vault just break glass only? In other words, they're managing all the privileged accounts, and when they give access, everybody just basically has root or admin that they're checking out and
basically, I mean, they're going to have the access that those accounts have locally defined on each system.
So they're managing it, like you said before, they're managing local at the system. CyberArk is just vaulting those.
That's it.
And they would have to go to each system to kind of change and manage each.
Each privilege, each privilege that the privilege account, the privileges of those accounts is locally managed.
The Avecto, I mean, on Windows, they've got a little more capability.
Yeah,
but
sure.
But to Linux, they don't.
Right. Yeah, and there's, they are doing some stuff to help with that, right? But it's not very elegant at all, right? It doesn't match anything that Centrify can do, right? So that, they might be able to say, well, we can manage the sudo file locally.
It's a price, they just want to sell the vault.
Right. But again, the privileges are still local, right? We all know that managing local privileges, whether it's automated or not, it's just not the best practice because someone with elevated access can alter those privileges, right, create backdoors, right? We had a customer in Sumitomo, for example, that they even with Centrify removed sudo off the system. So sudo is the way to elevate your privilege, right? Defined locally on each host. That's the best practice, you know? Listen, how are you stopping backdoors from occurring, right? You know, we have a customer, you know, financial services customer, that they wanted to put a stop to this, so they removed sudo off the system, right? And basically, Centrify's monitoring local accounts for them as well. And so these are the kinds of scenarios you have to just be able to kind of speak to and help kind of paint the picture for the customer, right? Okay. So, you know, how is this different than what we do today? You know, I think it's always like, oh, CyberArk against us and our way or versus their way. You know, this message is much more like, you know, complementary, right? We can help you better secure and better manage the privileges of your privileged accounts, regardless of what vault you use, whether it's ours, CyberArk's, right? I mean, that's kind of a synergistic sort of message in this particular case.
On the distributed systems, I mean, how many privileges or types of profiles would people typically create? You were talking about it like, you know, Unix or you check out root. Well, is that the way they do it, or would they create, you know, 20, 15 gradations of profile?
It depends on the system's function, right? So if it's like a database server, web server, or you know, SAP server. So typically you have your admin, and then you have typically what I kind of call functional groups of people that also have access based on what that system is, right? So you have a lower level admin set in charge of the applications that that system has. So typically we have like 4 or 5 different ones. You got your admin, and then you have maybe different levels of admins that are much more application focused, right? So what a lot of customers do is, with Evolve, is they take, you have a root account, and then they create other generic accounts. Generic account 1, generic account 2, generic account 3, right? They give those accounts sudo access, right? On Windows, right? They might put them in different groups. Windows is interesting because there's really no sudo concept. So you're either an admin or you're not. There is no in between, so Windows is even worse, right? People say, oh, Windows, you can tie it to AD, but there's no fine-grained management, privilege management capability at all.
Yeah.
It's on or off, you're an admin or you're not. So that's great, accounts are central, right? But everybody has admin access. That's just not the right way to do things, right? So essentially, what people do is create these generic accounts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They vault them, and then they give the humans the access to those generic accounts. That's typically what most people do, right? But then again, you got to create these accounts on each machine, and some people use automation for this, right? Templates, Chef, Puppet, and whatnot. But still, 4 or 5 local accounts. It's 4 or 5, pseudo entitlements for each of those accounts, right? Someone has to manage. I can automate the creation, but what about the reporting of that moving forward? How do I know people aren't getting around these things? That's where it gets really difficult, and that's where Centrify can really help, right? So with us, you wouldn't need to create those 4 or 5 local accounts. You wouldn't need to manage the sudo access, right? You give their privileged account, the human privileged account, a role in Centrify. It gives them access to all the systems with the right privileges. And I can report on the access, I can put on MFA, I can do a number of things, audit the access, more accountability, all these things that we were discussing. So that's the model. And again, a lot of customers are doing this, a lot of them, and we don't really talk enough about it.
Well, that depends on the maturity of the customer too. You look at some of our, the people that are responding to an audit, for example. They're like, okay, just vault it, we gotta get that. So it's kind of on us as the vendor to say, okay, great, we're gonna satisfy that audit. But you know what, let's spend some time over the next year. Let's mature your environment. Let's get into role-based controls and things like that.
Right. Yeah, and I think this is where, just having a couple of examples, right? Hey, here's what another customer did, right? Here's why they did it, right? What are you guys doing in this area, right? Are you concerned about backdoors? Are you concerned about people getting around the controls, right? Because they have local access with a privileged account and you're managing privileges locally. How are you reporting on what privileges these privileged accounts actually have, right? Those are the kind of leading pointed questions that will help you that will help you with this. So, you know, we can talk about other customers too. If you have some examples, bring them up, great. This is, you know, JPMC. You know, Gary has the numbers on them, but I think we're $8 million something of software licensing in the last 3 years.
100,000 licenses.
100,000 licenses, right? And, you know, customer we've been working with for just a long time. You know, 8-9 years, different, you know, projects, different attempts, and finally we were able to close them about 4 years ago. But, you know, their whole thing, it was that they understood that in order to properly reduce risk, you have to first consolidate identities. So a lot of customers, and JPMC is a very mature customer, of course, right? But a lot of people think that by vaulting passwords, I solve the problem, right? JPMC realized that by reducing the attack surface, AKA reducing the number of identities, it's really the best way to reduce your risk, your exposure, right? So they basically did this whole project around identity consolidation. That's the project we tied ourselves to. It's a single sign-on initiative. You know, they basically took all their Unix, Linux systems, put them in Active Directory. All these local accounts that were on these machines are now Active Directory accounts. All those accounts get roles in Centrify. The password and how these accounts, how people get access to these accounts is something they do outside of Centrify. But the authentication of the account and the access, so can that account actually log on? And then the privileges of the account, that's all managed by Centrify, right? So if you're a DBA, you go through some portal that they have to get access. You actually get the access as an account called Oracle. You don't get access as yourself. They actually have two models, really. Dev, you can log on to machines as yourself. In production, you cannot log on as yourself. You actually log on as an account called Oracle, for example, if you're a DBA. That account is an Active Directory account that Centrify is managing access. And the privileges of that account are managed by Centrify. And the way they do it is, depending on the environment, they have different accounts. So they have Oracle account _ environment 1, _ environment 2. So not just anybody just gets access to, you know, all the servers of Oracle. It's just not the way it works. You get specific access to specific systems based on the account that you can access. But again, Centrify is managing all the privileges for that account. Okay. Make sense? Questions? Okay. So again, it's a little difficult maybe, but you know, you got to practice these things, right? Practice those messages, right? But this is definitely something many customers are doing. So obviously, cloud is the other kind of big thing that's happening, right? That's impacting, you know, basically impacting everybody. But do people know what hybrid cloud is? John, what's hybrid cloud?
What do you mean hybrid cloud? Like
What's a hybrid
on-premise,
cloud?
their on-premise cloud, and then
Right.
Azure.
Yeah, exactly. Good.
Yep.
So hybrid cloud is basically a customer has some kind of solution that's helping them essentially provision workloads on-premise. VMware has a solution, IBM has a solution, right? Azure, you know, has a solution, but basically it's the customer spins up machines internally, right? And then you can have your public clouds, your AWS, your Azure, your Googles, et cetera, right? So most customers have a hybrid cloud, right? In fact, you know, if you look at this study here, I put a link in the slides. Out of this survey, 69% of people have a hybrid cloud, right? So everybody's very focused on AWS and Azure and all this other stuff, but most people have both an internal cloud and an external cloud provider. And what a lot of people do is they look at the public cloud in two ways. One, they're deploying new applications out there maybe, right? But a lot of people deploy applications in the private cloud, and then as they need capacity, they burst out to the public clouds, right? That's how most people, it changes of course, but that's how most people are.
That's really the fundamental premise behind hybrid.
That's right, exactly right. And then a multi-cloud, right, is typically referred to when you have two or more public cloud providers that you're leveraging. So you're leveraging Azure and AWS, right? So I put, seems basic, but you want to figure out where your customers are. You have hybrid cloud, are you multi-cloud? Are you doing hybrid and multi-cloud? You want to try to figure out where the customer is, right, in that journey, right? Because this is going to then allow you to position how you can attack the customer, right? How you can hopefully penetrate the customer, right? So, 69%, as I mentioned here, are using some kind of hybrid cloud offering, right? And really the key message, and this is the message that you guys should be delivering, is we all know that the more stuff we have, right, the more heterogeneous the environment. So if I have a hybrid cloud, if I have multi-cloud, right, I have heterogeneity, that's difficult to manage. That's the bottom line, right? I have to worry about security now in my private cloud, in AWS, in Azure. It's difficult. It's just really hard to do, right? So now I have to manage security 3, 4 different ways for all these different systems, right? That's where it gets difficult. And I put a link to this article here. It's titled "Why Cloud Management is a Mess." And again, these are things you could reference in your emails or whatever your customers, however you're communicating to them, right? But I mean, one quote I found interesting. One of the interviewees said, "If you want consistent management across cloud, you cannot use the unique features of those clouds, right? So you can't use AWS's feature sets, right? Because you're going to be locked in, right? So you got to use that lock-in fear to position, Centrify as a cloud-agnostic security framework, right? Doesn't matter if your workload's in Azure. Doesn't matter if it's in AWS. Doesn't matter if it's hybrid, on-prem. Doesn't matter if you go from on-prem burst out to public. It's the same security framework.
Now you have
Right.
17 different ways of managing 17 different environments, as
that's
opposed
it.
to one platform you can put everything into.
That's right. That's it, right?
That's heavy. That's big.
That's the key message, right?
And CyberArk doesn't have that, no, they can't say that. This is, that's the big one.
Right.
When they ask for differentiators.
Yeah. So, we use this pretty successfully at Fidelity, right, as a strategy, why did they move with us? Why didn't they go with the native AWS offerings, for example? I mean, this was the key message, right? Regardless of where your workloads are, on-prem, in AWS, in Azure, right, you're going to be managing security and access and privileges the exact same way, right? To me, the line I always try to use with the cloud is, it's like gas stations, right? Sunoco, whatever, right? You're gonna pull up, and you're probably gonna go where the cheapest gas is for the most part, right? Today, one in the corner is offering a better price than the one down the block, great, and you go there, right? And that's where the cloud is going. It's not quite there yet, but Google's offering a special next week. Compute hours are gonna be 50% off. Great, take my workloads, whoop, Google next week. AWS goes, oh great, oh man, Google provided an offer last week. We're going to provide 30% off for the next 2 months. Great, move my workloads to AWS, right? So that's ultimately what customers want, the ability to just shift, right, based on market demands. Maybe AWS is an outage. They can shift resources to Azure. I mean, that's ultimately where things are going to go. So I use that gas analogy a lot. People seem to like it. Hey, the cloud is like gas stations, right? You want to be able to go to where the cheapest gas is, Mr. Customer. But if you're locked in and using AWS's native stuff, you can't do that, right? You just can't, right? If your car's designed to just put Sunoco in, I can't go to the Gulf station down the block that's offering me a better price. Right? I mean that. A little corny, right? But I mean, I think it works, right? So again, this is where, regardless of where your workloads is, Centrify can create a vendor-agnostic security framework, right? And you can use those words, right? Alter them as you wish, but ultimately that's what the value is, right? So if you look at Fidelity, right? I mean, we were working with these folks, obviously for a long time. Kurt and I initially closed a deal for on-prem, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, right? Long time ago. Then basically, like every other customer, they're going to the cloud. And AWS is their main provider. They are doing some things in Azure, and Sean can, speak a little bit more about, the environment and landscape and what it looks like. But, you know, they understood that they wanted to manage access to systems the same way, regardless of where the systems were deployed. That was the bottom line, right? They didn't want to manage access to the machines in AWS this way, access to the on-prem machines this way, access to the Azure machines this other way, different teams managing access to different places. I mean, they just didn't want that. It's just such a big place, right? That the minute you create, you know, 3 or 4 different ways of doing things, it just super complicates compliance, reporting. I mean, it just goes downstream from there. So they wanted to manage things, they wanted to manage access to these workloads the exact same way. And, you know, after many meetings for a year or so, many trips to Raleigh and whatnot, you know, they realized that Citrify could offer that consolidated solution. That regardless of where workloads are going to be deployed, access is managed the same way, right? The other thing around this is that you have to also understand that, you know, customers have been working on like complying and security and reporting for a long time. Like, these are not new things, right? So they built all these systems, all these reports, and now they go to the cloud. What happens to all that, right? Are you recreating that as the customer? What does that look like, right? So the great thing with us is because we, for the most part, tie everything back to Active Directory, right? Is as you go to the cloud, you can still use the same reporting frameworks, the same compliance tools, etc. Most of them are tied into Active Directory, group membership, things like that, to some extent. So those are some of the things you may want to also talk to the customers about. Is, you know, it's great, you go to the cloud, but, you know, how's it affecting your, you know, compliance, you know, requirements around reporting, user access, risk, etc. And see what they tell you, right? You know, again, with us creating security, a vendor or cloud or whatever agnostic security framework, you know, we can report on access regardless of where machines are deployed. Same way, by the way, tying it back to your existing Active Directory investment. Right. Questions on Fidelity, or Sean, maybe you want to add something, or John, or?
The one thing I would add that has kind of, you know, came out after, you know, so they purchased and then we did the POC after the purchase, and there were some things that came out that were big differentiators after the POC. One was that at the time they were, you know, they were flip-flopping between whether or not to use Cloud Join or use the full client, and they had set up a pipe between AWS to their on-prem Active Directory so that they could leverage their on-prem Active Directory up in AWS and use the full client. But even with that big pipe, they saw all sorts of latency issues. Their sites and services were all, I mean, their AD's a mess, but they had all kinds of sites and services issues, DNS issues. So that was another huge differentiator, the fact that we were able to say, hey, look, we can, not only is this heterogeneous, I mean, not only can we do this cloud agnostically, but we can also, you don't even have to worry about AD. You don't have to worry about maintaining a pipe or putting anything up there from an Active Directory component. So they're doing, you know, 40,000 licenses without a directory up there.
Yeah.
And even with that pipe, they saw all kinds of issues because they were using the automated scripts to light up their clients, and they couldn't join a domain, or they couldn't find a domain controller, and they were forcing a domain controller. They were getting all kinds of sites and services errors and everything, and all that just went away with the little thing client.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? Because what happens is, I mean, we can kind of dive into cloud stuff and talk about that forever probably, but the big problem there is obviously it was slow, but also AWS charges for traffic that goes through that pipe. Active Directory traffic is very expensive. There's a lot of LDAP, Kerberos, there's just a number of different things that go there, right? Because it was designed to, you know, work in a data center, right, where networks are close to each other and things like that, right? And with our cloud platform, right, it's much more lightweight. It's all HTTPS traffic, right? So it's all web traffic.
Yeah, they had problems with ports. They had all kinds of problems with ports, not opening the right ports.
And
we only did
because
TCP, not UDP
right.
for,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
dumb stuff like that too. That just all goes away.
Right, and because it's web traffic, right? Web traffic, if you, right, it was designed to be lightweight, right? You could be here accessing a website across the world, right? So those same frameworks, right? We introduced with our cloud platform that you know, delivers a lot of speed and a lot of efficiency as well. So good. Any, John, any comments on Fidelity?
I mean,
Share
the
on
only thing
sample?
I mean, I think everybody's kind of gone through this. This stuff works so good on-prem
Yeah.
that when you go into these accounts, you know, sometimes the higher ups don't even know it's there. Like, so
Yeah.
it really comes down to like with Fidelity as an example, like going back a year and a half, but we just went through this with Liberty Mutual the other day, right?
Yeah.
Same thing is that, you know, just really going around, getting a larger group to educate, right? Because, you know, we'll find like, okay, these people at Fidelity knew, but Priya, as an example, had no idea when we started that we could even help her with this, solve this problem. So, and we just went through the same thing with Liberty Mutual the other day. You know, finally getting Tim Steinkoff helped us get to the right people.
Good.
And Sean was able to kind of talk to them about how we could help them with their cloud initiatives.
Good.
So.
Was there resistance to putting the Centrify agent on initially, or was that fine because that was already existing on-prem? Just want to say.
Well, yeah, their
That was
original
the
plan
original
was
plan.
they were just gonna replicate everything that they did on-prem up in the cloud, and then, you know.
And then everything changed.
Yeah, and everything completely changed, but yeah. But yeah, so it's, I mean, you can use your, it's great that we can help you use your on-prem AD, but if your AD is a mess anyways, like this big unwieldy multi-force shit show, they were just bringing all those AD problems up into the cloud with them, and you're like, you don't even need to do that if you don't want to.
Right. Yeah, but even if say, you know, we're getting into kind of implementation approaches a little bit, but even if they say no agent, right, we still have a cloud platform where we could do privileged account management of those local accounts, right, in the cloud, regardless of where the workloads are as well, on-prem, Azure, AWS, etc., right? So that's the nice thing about the cloud platform, right? So as you say you have a hybrid cloud and you are provisioning machines locally, well, what happens when you burst AWS? You now have to tie your vault, on-prem vault, to AWS. What if you have, you know, 5 different AWS accounts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And different VPCs and whatnot? What does all that look like, right? And this is where, again, by just having a cloud platform from us, regardless of your cloud environment, on-prem environment, it's just going to work. I think that it's good for you guys to also know, even if someone says AWS, right? It's not just one AWS environment, right? It's like one per department. So like, I mean, most customers have 20, 30, 50 AWS accounts. These are different environments inside of AWS, right? So ask that question sometimes. I think it gives you a lot of insight. Great, you're using AWS. How many AWS accounts do you have? And we find other customers really struggling with managing, you know, workloads across all those different AWS environments, right? They're either managed differently, there's no consistency, right? There's no central management, right? It's almost like creating a bunch of silos, but they're all in AWS, right? So I call it a centralized mess sometimes, right? So just because someone says AWS and that's all we're using, dig in a little deeper, right? You know, just to figure out how it is that they're using AWS, how many accounts, right? How do you guys manage access to those resources up there? Does every group do it individually, you know, differently? How do you report on this stuff, right? And you'll be surprised. You'll get, yeah, we don't know what everybody else is doing, or yeah, no, we don't have any way to really report on this, or you know, hey, the auditors haven't asked us for this yet. They haven't really caught up to, you know, the modern times. You say, well, why don't we can help you, right? We can help you so you can comply when that time comes, right?
Or even to Fel's point, think about, I always ask the question, when you know, you're in that first meeting, how many times have you made an acquisition in the last 5 years? You know, because you're getting them, you gotta get them to think differently, and they go, wow, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a year we make an acquisition, right? You know, the head of the company makes a decision, they don't know what this mixed bag is coming with them. And there's another reason, you know, that this platform plug, you know, without having to be on what Fel said, you know, there's so many reasons, and you just sort of drip on all these reasons why a platform that, and what's going to become 2 years from now, because 6 years ago containerization, Kubernetes wasn't a word everybody knew about. Now it's common. right? What's gonna happen 10 years from now, right? Centrify is going to allow you to plug into this, right? It's not like we stop, or like you said, we go from Google to Azure, or, out to AWS, and you switch. When you switch, you gotta now change to their proprietary tools. Or like I said, or maybe there's 3 different ways of doing it. Again, it's cumbersome and less secure, right?
Yeah, and then the third angle is, vendor consolidation and managed services, right? So I think these are still big trends, right? I mean, I think most people want to consolidate vendors, right? They're going to be exercised. IT budgets are shrinking. That's just our reality, right? And we play well there, right? And we'll talk about TD Ameritrade in a moment, and Gary can comment a little bit more on them. But if you position Centrify correctly, we can be successful at helping customers consolidate vendors, right? We really can. Collapse the number of tools that they use. The other obviously trend is managed services, right? You call it SaaS, call it MSP, whatever the word you want to use. Ultimately, it's outsourcing, right? IT, right? So we play well there as well. We have a SaaS solution, right? So why are you managing, your password vault yourself as the customer, right? You're going to SaaS for everything else, right? We can help, right? And maybe you paint that picture 2-3 years down the line. Maybe it's a longer sales cycle for you, but if everything else is going managed services, right? Why are you managing this yourself, right? We provide a security framework in the cloud as well, right? Regardless of where resources are deployed. So I think you can tap into those two, nerves just to see what the customer's reaction is, right? Right. We're helping customers consolidate vendor, and we're helping them, deliver security as a service. Maybe that's a tagline, right? Well, how do you do that? Security as a service, right? We explain to you, right? And you go into hybrid, multi-cloud, and vendor consolidation, integrated access plus privileged account management solution, and you can take it from there, right? So if we kind of review what the customer's environment looks like, right? So, the good old days, customer had, whatever number of data centers typically, right? Now it's that, and they are consolidating some of those. So maybe it goes from 5 to 3 or, 5 to 2, right? There's still 2 data centers probably. And then you have now X number of AWS accounts, as we've discussed, this number of Azure environments, this number of Google environments, right? I mean, it's just exploding, right? And it's just really, really hard to manage, right? And just because things are going to the cloud doesn't mean that all the compliance and regulatory and security requirements go away. Oh, you're in the cloud, okay, you're PCI compliant automatically. It just doesn't work that way, right? So, this is, again, some of the conversations you can have with your customers. Hey, we're finding customers just really struggle with complying to regulatory requirements because their environments now are so distributed and so heterogeneous, right? You guys seeing that? And hopefully dig into that from there. Make sense? So, again, we deliver the best of both worlds. We can help you consolidate vendors, right? Provide an access, privilege management solution, right? And we do this in the cloud, right? These are all 2 big trends happening. These are 2 big trends that we can align to. So, Gary can talk about this a lot more, but TD Ameritrade, longtime Centrify customer as well. They deploy only 40% of cyber per year. That's it. And just the vault, right? Just root account management. Just a lot of complaints from the end users around the solution, just the end user experience. I can't tell you how many customers I've been at where they just go around the vault, by the way. That's another angle we could talk about, but literally these are sysadmins that just go around the vault. Just literally, they're supposed to go to the vault and log into the machine. They don't. They just create a back door, create a key. They do a number of things. Personally, I've seen it. Like next to them, they just go around the vault. Or the session's supposed to time out. They leave the session just open. Create a little script that just keeps the session alive, so they never have to go to the vault again. So just a lot of backdoor stuff, happening. End user experience was just really bad.
What was the challenge on the lack of expedited deployment? Was it that too many accounts, too many identities?
Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? I mean, you gotta literally go to every single machine, and you gotta import these accounts, right? And then you have to tie those accounts to the people that should have privileges for those accounts. That is a difficult exercise, okay? With our vault, with any vault. Okay?
Service accounts alone,
Right.
That's
I mean,
months.
yes. I mean, you're talking environment with 10,000.
25,000.
25,000 servers, if you include the Windows machine, right? I mean, it's just hard. It's just really hard, right? I mean, really is difficult. And they'll throw out, we could do it, we talk about this on this stuff too, local account discovery. That's great. Discover the local account, that's awesome. Well, how do I then tie all those accounts back to the humans? Who's doing that work, by the way? Not the local account discovery. It's just discovering the account, bringing them into the vault. Now you have to figure out how you assign privileges to those accounts, right? A lot of this too, I mean, MetLife went through this, right, Ben? Is you have to then negotiate with the system's owners to do this work, okay? It literally becomes a negotiation. In MetLife, right, the negotiation was, okay, after a long time, by the way, we'll let you vault the passwords, you cannot rotate them. What's the point? I mean, literally, but that was a negotiation, right? And when the auditors came in, hey, we have a vault, the passwords are vaulted, but no, there's no rotation. So what do you think the admin's doing? Not going to the vault to do anything with the account. They know the password, they just log in directly, right? So, I mean, that's literally the reality of what's happening with the vaults out there, right? And again, whether it's our vault or CyberArk or Beyond Trust or whatever, those are the challenges of an implementation of the vault, right? So these folks are struggling, for 3 years, only 40% deployed, only doing, root account management on systems, maybe the administrator account on Windows machines. And they just realized, man, this is just a lot of work, right? What happens with a solution like CyberArk, because they are so hardware dependent, you start a project, you deploy the hardware, it takes you 3 years, now you gotta upgrade.
You gotta refresh.
You gotta refresh the deployment.
That's where they are now.
And it's very expensive. CyberArk will hit you over the head, right, to do this. And they're like, wait a second, so only 40% deployed, I have to upgrade my infrastructure, and what am I doing with this again? It just causes the customer to pause.
Well, it's
right?
coming down from the top too. They're looking at the numbers and saying, so we led with the modern use case, and that's how we got in there, and it was that really the secure remote access sort of use case for just directly connecting into where they needed access. And but we've grown obviously in there, and we have great advocates, and now they have two solutions. And the Fel's point is, it's right now time for a refresh and a maintenance cycle, and they're getting hit with a big bill. And the financial approvers way at the top are saying, all right, now you've got two overlapping solutions, vendor consolidation here, what are you gonna do, guys? So they're coming, my champions are coming, our champions are coming to me and saying, help us out here, we wanna just get rid of it and move everything onto you guys. So.
Yeah, I mean, great story. And then these folks are doing, again, everything from vaulting now with Centrify for their cloud. This is the on-prem cloud, by the way. This is private cloud. And they're also doing, access management with Centrify as well. So they're combining the vaulting plus the access management and our remote access as well, capabilities, all in one, right? To deliver a single solution for their private cloud, right? Their on-prem kind of legacy, let's call them legacy Linux systems, Unix systems, they're using Centrify as well. And then CyberArk is managing the root password for only 40% of those systems, right?
And now that they have the architecture in place, they're saying, Windows, it's time for Windows, so which becomes a big opportunity.
Right. Yeah, and that's the other thing with us, this whole thing is just, agnostic. Windows, Linux is managing access the same way, regardless of the system type, right? It doesn't really matter. And then, I don't know, they're not doing much public cloud stuff at the moment. I'm sure there's somebody's thinking about it, but obviously this framework, as they go cloud, public cloud, right, this would just simply extend or if they want to burst out the public cloud, this would just extend to that.
What's the deal with CyberArk's new remote? Has anybody seen that yet? Supposedly they have a new remote access solution.
Yeah, it's the Vaulted, it's the Vaulted acquisition. They made an acquisition recently.
Okay.
And what they're trying to say is, if you want to remotely log into a server, instead of having to go to the vault first and then establish your session to the server, you just go to your browser. It's really for SaaS apps, by the way, sorry, not servers, SaaS apps.
Yeah.
So if you want to access a SaaS app or something like that, you just put the URL in your browser and you're there. Under the covers, they're still intercepting that. So this project sits in line with that data stream, and it says, oh look, you're trying to go to that service. I'll pull the password out of the vault and I'll stuff it in the web traffic and we'll single sign you on. So it's kind of a SaaS single sign-on solution.
Okay.
It was an acquisition that ironically, that vendor does two things. 90% of what they do, CyberArk is not leveraging. It's that 10%
Okay.
leveraging for that. So it's single sign-on to SaaS apps. And they're saying that it's way faster than any other approach because you don't have anything else involved. You're just using your browser, but it's still being intercepted. It's still being checked and having passwords stuffed into it. You know, it's more of an IDaaS thing than it is a
Okay.
kind of thing.
Good. So the other, kind of shifting gears a little bit, the other request I got, kind of reaching out to some of you around, topics and things you want to hear about was DevOps. I know David's going to cover some of this as well, so this is meant to be like a very light, basic DevOps kind of conversation. And, again, if the questions from you guys drives a little bit more interaction, right? But maybe before I give you the answer, what's DevOps, Tom?
Yeah, I don't know if I can describe it accurately.
Try, go for it.
An environment where the organization is able to develop tools before they're deployed into production is kind of how I look at it.
Right.
And how I talk to, that's the sense that I get, that's a kind of a playground,
Right.
if you wouldn't,
Yeah, so
internally, where it
let's-
doesn't go into other environments and they're able to do what they need to do, see if it works, and
Yeah, so let's go back to, again, I always like to kind of create the foundation, right? So the good old ways of doing things, right, is you were an application developer, right? And you were ready to deploy your application, right? What would you do, right? Got my software, code, my package is ready to be deployed. What would you do, right? Go to help desk ticket in, or IT support ticket in. I need 2 servers, I need a web server, I need a database server, install Oracle here, install Apache over here, and let me know when it's ready. And by the way, I need one for development, so I can test things, and QA, and production. So I actually need 6 servers, right? So somebody would go off and whatever, maybe spin up some VMs and whatnot, and install Apache for you, and install Oracle, and
3 weeks later.
right, a month later, hey, here's your servers, with the credentials and IP addresses and all this kind of stuff, right? And you install your package, and then, you installed version 2 of Apache. I needed version 2.5, right? Or you installed version Oracle 8. I need Oracle 8.5. Or, this machine is RHEL 8. It has an updated library that my app is, relying on that breaks something inside my app. Those are the realities of kind of deploying an application in the good old days. DevOps, basically, the whole idea and the whole premise is to automate all that, right? So that me as a developer, I basically have full control of the ecosystem that my application requires to function, right? So really, it's just automation, right? So instead of putting a ticket into IT, in my code, I say, give me a RHEL server, give me a Oracle database, this is the version, I deploy my code, I test it, I'm ready to go, right? Don't have to, call IT to provision machines or get the DBA involved for the most part, right? That's basically what DevOps is. It's just simply automating, right, the ecosystem that your application needs to properly run, okay? Very simple. And when you hear containers, that's basically the way to go and do that, right? So container basically has everything the application needs contained within it. Okay? That's all a container is, right? It's a mini machine, mini operating system that has all of the dependencies in it that the application needs to run, right? So it removes a lot of these external dependencies from the application development, right? They can just simply provision the environment that they need with all the dependencies that are required, containerize it, that's why it's called a container, you know, contain it together, put it together in a container, and basically deploy the container. Okay. Does that help? Does that make sense? Okay. So a container is just, as I mentioned, a small version of an operating system with all of the dependencies that the application needs in it, right? Okay. So in the good old days, right, you had like a database farm or a web farm and whatnot, right? And you deployed X number of applications there in that farm, right? And those days are with this model, right? Again, you have to develop your application for that environment. It has to work well in there. And you can't really test that maybe yourself, right? In this new world is essentially you put everything you need into your containers and then you just deploy. Right? So what's happening is that containers are exploding, right? Because the whole point of a container is that basically it contains everything they need with it, right? Those web farms of the good old days, database farms, those things are, kind of going away to an extent, right? And everything is being instead, done in containers.
You're in the database?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you have your database container, you have your web container. They'll talk to each other, right? Absolutely, absolutely, right? Because your application needs a specific version of Oracle, specific version of Postgres, right? You're going to test that yourself as you develop your application to make sure all that's working properly. You're going to package all that together and then deploy, right? So
I'll just add a little bit more.
Yeah.
In the DevOps environment, Kubernetes or containers in general, people are doing call-walk running. So what we'll find is a lot of customers will take things that used to run in VMs and they'll package them up into a container. Containers are just a little bit easier to deploy. Think of it like if I was able to create a virtual machine and just save the disk image. Right now I have a gold image. I can go launch another VM exactly like it. Containers just make that whole thing much, much, much easier. As customers get more advanced, the developers will take their bigger applications. And if you've ever seen the inside of an application, it basically is do this, do this, do this, do this functions, right? So they'll say call out to this function and execute it. Inside the loop, they'll call out to different functions. And so they'll take their application that used to have a bunch of functions on the inside of the app, and they'll say, well, let's create a container for that function. And let's create a container for that function. So you take an application that used to be one executable with, let's say, 10 functions, now you have 10 containers. The reason for doing that is it gives operations, and hence the ops and the dev now, they're supposed to be working together, right? So the idea being that if you have a function that was overloaded or got used a lot inside your application, well, I could spin up not just one, I could spin up 10 of them, or maybe make it elastic and spin up a whole bunch. It just gives ops more flexibility to monitor the application and say, you know what, that's busy, I need to scale up and I need to run more of them. So that's sort of the run state. And where are customers now? Somewhere along that line. We've got a lot of customers that are just simply taking their app on a VM and putting it in a container and calling it good. And it's almost exactly like, frankly, it's the old days. Solaris had this feature, so did HPUX, so did AIX, sparse zones in a Solaris operating system. That's exactly what the container is. So there's really no difference between the technology, it's how they're using it. They're using it now to create smaller, lighter weight things that are simply easier to manage. Our role here is still the same, except that IT staff probably don't log on quite as much, but these computers need to talk to each other. Inside that single application, you could just call that function. It's inside your app, right? You're doing a call inside in memory. Now the call is from this container needs to call that container and probably pass some data. Now there's an authentication that needs to take place.
some developers are just saying, trust me, it's secure, ignore that behind the covers. It's all on a private network. And that's where the ops guys come in and say, ooh, wait a minute, I can't go get this thing certified. My auditors are gonna scream at me if we don't solve, authentication. Yep. And right, so there's another term, DevSecOps. It's not quite widely used yet, but the idea being, why don't you get the security guys involved and not just developers and not just operations staff, it's security. So anyway, hopefully it makes sense.
Okay, good. So do containers make sense to people? Yes? I mean, this is important.
I just have a quick question. Do we have an example, like a customer example that we could walk through, like of how somebody's using Centrify in that type of environment?
Yeah, I can't think of a customer off the top of my head that is, using containers with Centrify at the moment. But a lot of times we don't get exposed to some of these things, right? It's like David said, right? They're taking VMs and just making them containers.
Right.
So anything that Centrify delivers works in a container, right? It's the same feature set, same capability set, right? The use case maybe differs a little bit. We can talk a little bit about that, right? As David said, the whole point of containers is I can automate, right? Mm-hmm. That's really it. So, as I go through this, right? Okay, where does Kubernetes come into play, right? So we have a container. It's got everything my app needs, right? Well, David mentioned scaling up the app, right? We're getting a lot of demand for this particular capability inside my app. It's getting overwhelmed. I now need to scale it up, right, to provide more access, right? More capability. So this is where Kubernetes comes in. Really, all it is a container orchestration system, right? You tell it, deploy this container. It deploys it for you. You'd say, deploy 3 replicas of this container, right? And it deploys 3 replicas of it. Exposes ports and things like that. You then say something like, when you see these containers be consumed, scale up, right? So you provide metrics that drive how the orchestration system is going to scale up your application and scale down, right? That's all Kubernetes is. So because you have now a bunch of containers, right? So as David said, a typical application, right, had, 2 servers, and maybe dev, QA, prod. Well, maybe that now becomes, 20 containers, right? Okay. So you have a lot more of these now, right? They're smaller footprint, right? And very specialized to do certain things for the application, right? But now you went from 5 to 20. Now you have more things. How do you manage all this, right? So that's where Kubernetes comes in. So literally all it is just an orchestration platform. It's going to help the deployment and the management of your containers. Okay.
And when we get to this level, we've got to utilize a right to use on larger environments, or the bursting. I mean, this is a challenge, right? The Capital One example. So we have to evolve with that.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that, right? I have my personal opinions here, right? I mean, this is just where this is the new world, and if customers are down the line in this journey, like a Capital One is, then we need to do what we can as a sales organization to provide the best model for them. I mean, I think it's just a big mistake not taking that deal with Capital One, right? We could have learned so much from them. Still not free. It's we're giving us $600,000 or whatever it was, right? And, great customer that we could have referenced, learned from. Now they're doing who knows what, right? With those cloud systems, right? Containers, etc. But yeah, I mean, what we need, I'll get into a little bit more, right? Is the $1 million question, right? Is if you can automate everything, this is what customers think, right? So no human is interacting with this machine anymore, right? If I automate everything, because what happens is if that application starts working, my orchestration system, Kubernetes in this example, right, will just destroy the container and spin up a new one. No human interaction required, right? back in the day, right, your web app stops working, oh, get the IT ticket, get the web guy to log in, take a look at the logs, restart the server, or somebody changed this config file, maybe messed something up, let's revert that change, and off we go, right? That required a human logging in. Now, the application is not working, Kubernetes just goes, oh, the heartbeat on this is just not coming back the way it should, destroy it, spin up a new one, right? And what it does is it actually downloads the container, right, the latest version of the container from a container store. There's a number of Docker Hub, there's a couple different, options there, and basically just spins up a new one, right? I mean, the way it works now, actually, right, if you want to look at the DevOps workflow, I make a code change on my laptop, I check it into GitHub. GitHub is a source code repository and management repository. That kicks off a job to what's called an integration platform that runs a number of tests against the app, right? Literally spins up a container, test, you specify the tests you want it to run. If those pass, it provisions the container. Kubernetes goes, oh, there's a new version of that container. Download it, runs. Your application is automatically in production without anybody having to touch anything. All you did was commit your code from your laptop, and that's it.
You define it in the YAML, where you want to pull that container down from.
Yeah. So in your Kubernetes XML definition, you specify which container image.
Right.
And what you do is you typically, from your laptop, right, you provision that code, which tells GitHub picks up a job to Jenkins, you put Jenkins or Travis CI. These are integration tools that run automated tests on your code, and once those tests pass, your container gets provisioned into a container store. Kubernetes then logs into that container store, downloads the container, and provisions it, right? So it's all automated. Nobody is logging in and moving code and deploying the code. It's literally that automated. So that's the $1 million question, right? If everything is literally completely automated, right, do we need to manage access and privileges, right? And that's the conversation you need to have with the customer, right? Because they'll say, well, everything's automated. This thing, goes off the deep end. I just provision a new one, right? Well, I don't need to manage access and privileges. That's just simply not true, right?
Who in the operations area is managing the Kubernetes typically?
It's an infrastructure solution. I think of it as like VMware.
So operations, okay, IT operations, and then
the IT infrastructure. So Kubernetes runs on top of machines, right? Right. So bare metal. It could be Red Hat machines. It could be a number of different things, right? But basically, it's an application that leverages compute resources to deploy and manage your containers, right?
Kubernetes is open source, or is it proprietary?
It's open source, yeah. It's open source. It's managed by what's called a Cloud Native Foundation, CNF. It started at Google, right? Now it's managed by CNF, right? So I kind of browsed over this a little bit, right? But why is Kubernetes sort of taking off? Let's call it that, right? It's been kind of gaining momentum. Why do you hear it all the time? Is because of that hybrid multi-cloud, right, thing we discussed before, right? With Kubernetes, I could deploy containers in any platform, on-prem, in Azure, in AWS, it doesn't matter, right? I can have different Kubernetes clusters running, and it's the same management framework of my containers, regardless of the platform, right? So I can, this is what's letting people deploy in Azure, deploy in AWS, take things on-prem and burst them onto the cloud, right? Because they don't have to worry about leveraging vendor-specific container management systems, right? Make sense? You just have Kubernetes clusters in these different environments and just provision my containers accordingly.
That's an interesting point. If you have an account who is heavily into this and they're leveraging Kubernetes for exactly that reason, centralized management of all of those containers, right, multi-cloud, hybrid environment, that's what we're doing for identity and access. Exactly the same model, right? We're managing centrally identities, their access rights, what they can do, what they can't. multi-cloud across all different platforms, exactly the same philosophy. So if that works for them in the dev type of arena, then it should equally apply in the access management.
No, definitely.
Yeah, so our conversation, probably leading into it,
Yeah.
our conversation changes, right? We no longer talk as much about the staff gaining access to the machines. It's not about humans anymore. It's about the machines. Every one of them, every single container is going to have an identity. And every container must authenticate to another container because they don't operate by themselves anymore. They have to run in a cluster. And a web node that's front facing has got to go talk to a worker node to get stuff done, or got to go talk to a database node to go get data. So how do they talk to each other? So the way I would, at the highest level, I would describe we're the identity provider for computers. Just like, you know, Adaptive is the IDP for humans, or the identity provider for humans. We do that for computers. It's now a centralized role to do that with C-Client. Now AD did it for us on-prem, and these containers can talk to each other using Kerberos on-prem, but when you go to multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, centralized authentication service applied to computers is exactly what they're going to need, an IDP for the computers. Amazon has something, their IAM service, but it only works for Amazon. It doesn't work across Amazon and Azure. That's what's unique about us and what we have to offer these customers is the hybrid cloud capability.
Yeah, it's exactly it, and you know, I think there's a couple angles here, right? But one of them is, what if something does go wrong, right? What is the access method? So, you know, selling break glass, basically. So the conversation, I think, needs to shift to that a little bit, right? If something does go wrong and you want to go log in and check things out and whatnot, well, how does that happen? Right? I know it's a remote possibility because you have, you know, your orchestration systems and everything is automated. But what if you need to? Right?
There's also incident response. So if somebody compromises a container, you don't just blow it away and stuff. You want to investigate. How did they get in? What did they compromise? What were they looking for? What's the pathology of that attack? So incident response security is going to want to log in and look at that shit.
Right.
So, sorry.
Yeah, I think the other thing again is, you know, just obviously again, compliance is not going away. So how can you meet your compliance requirements in this new world, right? What's your plan for that, right, Mr. Costa? How do you prove that, you know, a container hasn't been compromised? How do you prove that nobody has access, right? I mean, okay, nobody can log in. Prove it, right? How do you prove that, right? I mean, that's what compliance is all about, right? You got to measure and you got to prove, right? So how do you do that, Mr. Customer, right? You know, again, regardless of if it's a physical machine, a VM, or a container, and how all that's managed, Centric Cloud can help you with this, right?
It's still a shared privilege account.
Going back to what David was saying, obviously, we're all saying no more, very limited human interaction. But David kind of framed it up as it's kind of the same world, just machine to machine, but where are we outside of, Tony was saying around breaching, things like that?
Well,
Where's our, what is the plan? So the C client goes on it and it's actually doing the auth between machines, or that's not?
Right. So
or that's our future vision?
So it's that presentation we delivered to Credit Suisse, because we had that same discussion with them.
Yeah.
So these customers are, and I've got a few slides I can go into depth about it, but the customers are looking at other alternative solutions. They're not looking for a PAM. So that's very important to realize that, you know, first of all, we traditionally sold to the ops team. In DevOps, we must find a way to talk to the developer. Ask ops, are you using containers? Are you using Kubernetes or Docker? All three of these words very similar. Some people will say Docker, they won't say Kubernetes. Sometimes they'll say containers because they might be actually running it on EKS, Elastic Container Service on Amazon. So there's a lot of different names to be used. And then you'll also hear CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous deployment, is all it really means. Because Nirvana is where you get to a state like Facebook, where a developer builds something, checks it in, and as long as the automated QA testing says it's good to go, it gets published to production right now. Like, it's triggered. right? So that's where people want to get. Now, people are not there yet. Not in enterprise, not in run the bank kind of software. They'll still do a lot more rigorous checking. They'll probably have a 20 or 30-day cycle for updates. But the features that they're looking for is centered around an identity for the container, the ability to store things, secrets is what we call it, right? So the server spins up, it's got to publish, I'm a server and here's how to talk to me, right? What port are you listening to? What IP address? What data do you hold that other containers might want? If you think about it, inside that application, the functions used to have all of this stuff as parameters for the function. All those parameters now get stored somewhere. It's almost like a registry for all that data. So a server spins up and it's got to publish all this stuff. Clients spin up and say, where's my database server? I need to talk to him. He's got to go retrieve this stuff, secrets. And then how does the client authenticate to the server? There's a lot of different ways. We could let the server spin up and store a password, and let the clients retrieve it. Or I could give them both accounts with an authentication system, us, and we could use OAuth to let a client grab a token, it's temporary, that lets me access the server, or a SAML token, or it could be a JWT token. There's a lot of different ways to solve the problem. The thing is, it's now a discussion with the developer. How would you like to build this application so that the ops guys can get it to pass security and get it into production?
Yeah, and I think the thing to keep in mind is kind of David hinted at this, is there's a journey, right? So you have to figure out where the customer is. Like, there's a lot of customers using containers like a VM, but people are still logging in, right? I mean, so it's not just because they're using containers doesn't mean nobody's logging into them, right? The Credit Suisse case, right? I mean, they still have access to development servers, right? So all the Azure access is for development servers, but developers work on those machines, right? They actually have Deloitte folks working on those machines, doing development, things like that. They, do whatever with the code, right? Because Credit Suisse wants to assure a clean machine that the developer's working from, something that hasn't been compromised, right? Something that doesn't have any malware on it, something that they control, right? Not some Deloitte machine that they're working from, right? That who knows, what state that's in, right? The code cannot be shared, right? Copied, etc., right? To the best of their ability. So, you have to figure out, right, kind of where the customer is in that journey, right? And then apply our solutions accordingly. But bottom line is we can provide both human access and application access via the platform, right? And that's how you can maybe word it to your customers, right? So I just put this together, kind of the angle, right, for us in the process, right? Yeah, definitely move to the new world, Mr. Customer, but don't sacrifice security, right, in the way, right, around the way. Security compliance is still there, right? They become much more important, right, as things go more heterogeneous, multi-cloud, hyper-cloud, all these things we've been discussing, right? It becomes just much more important because data is in a lot more places now, right? Compliance is about making sure data is properly secure, right, and managed access for it properly. So that's not going away. We can automate security, right? So what happens is, because security is so difficult, the developers just go like, no thanks, right? This is just going to get in my way. Security is just going to make things harder for me. We can automate all of this. Usually when I deliver these kinds of briefings to customers, right, I bring up a GitHub page, right? Go to GitHub and show, hey, look at the AWS templates, look at the Terraform templates, look at the GitHub page from Centrify. This is all things we can use to automate the security of our systems, right? Whether it's EC2 or Azure or containers, whatever it may be, just to prove, right, so they can visually see that we're a modern company, right, that has these capabilities built in, and again, we can automate the security, user access, right, privilege access, and remote access, right. So that one gets a little bit undersold, I think, sometimes, right, remote access. So we'll talk about Credit Suisse here last. Basically, regardless of where these machines are, Centrify can provide remote access for them, right? And there's a lot of customers using that capability as well, right? Criticis included, right? That find that just a very useful feature set. So we talk a lot about, you know, PAM and privilege access and user privileges. But don't undersell the remote access capability and how easy we actually deliver that. Because again, that's hard to do if you have, you know, 7 AWS accounts and Azure and AWS and Google. It's really hard to provide access to all those systems, right? Whether it's for break glass, emergency only purposes, or otherwise, right? The solution provides all this capability in a single platform. And then, you know, you want to just make sure that, because it's a new world that you just kind of mentioned, right? We're a modern company, right? You know, one of the things I keep hearing from people is that, you know, Centrify is a legacy company, right? It's just like, it's not true, right? We have cloud service built on, you know, modern platform that supports the latest frameworks, OAuth, right? It's all REST API based, right? It's a true multi-tenant cloud service. I mean, so you want to make sure you get these things, not necessarily these buzzwords out, but, you know, hey, we're a modern company, right? We have a cloud platform that's built on modern frameworks that you can leverage, right? As you try to secure this new world, right? Something to that extent, okay? And again, just the environment agnostic, right? Doesn't matter where. So quickly on Credit Suisse, right?
Can we go back to one last one? So in this space, we talked about it last night.
Yeah.
HashiCorp. Hashi, everybody's using that, right?
Sure.
What does it mean? What is it? Why are they using it?
It's just a secret management platform, right? Why do people use it is it's because of open source. So, and as David mentioned, the developer is the key in this new world, right? So the developer's trying to write this stuff or whatever, and the first thing they're going to do is go open source, right? That's just the way developers think.
Yeah.
So they go to open source and they take Hashi and it's, well, my application needs secrets, right? I'm going to store them in Hashi and I'm going to use their API to retrieve and store and do whatever I need to do, right? So because it's open source, guy downloads Hashi, installs it, gets it working. It's now part of the application, and then they go to production, right? And it's like, oh, well, how do we get support for this, right? Or maybe it's missing, the open source is missing some, you know, feature sets that are in the enterprise version of the offering. It's a strategy. It's a software strategy, right? So that's why you hear Hashi, right? So the developer becomes a big advocate for those kinds of solutions, right? And the selling strategy for those kinds of companies, right? The one I work for included is basically it's called open core, right? So you put an open source version of the product out there. The developer, because they're kind of in the driver's seat of this new world as we discussed, right? They're kind of, you know, doing all the development as well as the provisioning of the infrastructure the application needs now in this new DevOps world, right? They basically download this open source package, install it, start using it. But the minute they go to production, there's either some security feature or management feature that's missing. That's in the enterprise version. And then typically the managers, the architects, they want some kind of support, right? Not the developer, but, you know, upper management, higher level architects, they want to make sure that this architecture is going to be supported, right? If it's an issue with, you know, Hashi, what do they call, right? Not the developer, right? So that's where, that's why you hear it a lot. That's why you kind of like, oh my God, everybody has this thing, right? It's because of open source. But Centrify platform could do pretty much, I mean, there might be a few things here and there, right? But can pretty much do everything Hashi does, right? And the angle there is most customers, because of the way that this is being developed, have, imagine every developer downloading Hashi, right, for their application. Right? And Liberty Mutual has this problem, right, where they just have like, I don't know how many versions of Hashi out there, right? So it becomes basically a password vault sprawl, right? Whereas with us, you know, we have one single platform, right, where all the secrets can be managed in for all the applications, right? But we don't get to have that conversation because we're kind of late to the party, unfortunately, right?
with that, sure.
Yeah, we do have a customer, Live Nation, that is in the process of replacing HashiCorp using Centrify.
Good, that's great to hear.
And the advantage they find is centralization.
Centralization.
If you think about it, every developer that builds an application that's going to run in, let's say, a cluster, they install HashiCorp Vault as just, that's where I store all my stuff, and then they're going to install a Redis server, by the way, which is just a database to store all the name value pairs, right? Here's my server, and here's the port, and the IP address, that kind of stuff. So Centrify becomes the replacement for those two features, so now they don't need them inside their application. They can centralize it as a SaaS service.
Yeah.
They just make REST calls.
Yeah.
They get the exact same data back,
Yeah.
and we encrypt everything. So our secrets repository is just encrypted everything, right? So it's easy for the developer. He's just making a REST call. It's just that when he got started by himself, it was easy for him to go find, like, how people do this. You know, how do you keep up with the secrets for my clustered application? And there's just examples on how to use HashiCorp Vault. So our challenge is to get, you know, more information out there for developers, to make it easier for developers to get to our product and use it without talking to anybody at Centrify, which is why the freemium project, you know, to get it out on the AWS marketplace and say, you know, for the first 50 servers, you can have it, use it for free. Doesn't matter. But as soon as you go over 50 and you hit 51, it just automatically starts billing, which
We
we're
are doing
already
that?
used to.
We are going to do that?
It's already on the website now. So if you go to the marketplace now, it's available.
So
It's official next week, I think.
well, I think it's
We haven't
20
rolled out the
couple weeks.
internal messaging or how it works.
That's going to be on the 21st. We're going to do internal training with regards to the freemium, what it means, how's it going to affect you.
You set that up,
I sent it out this
You
morning,
sent it, yeah.
because I just got it confirmed with Torsten.
So part of it is just, we had to, you know, from a timing perspective, we had to get all this stuff in motion and publish to the AWS marketplace before you can make the public announcements.
Because just a couple more slides, so we could talk, you know, whatever else you guys want. But you know, I'm really Swiss, right? You know, again, typical, right? Moving to the cloud, started with AWS. Because of some Microsoft pressures on their ELA, decided to basically move to Azure, bottom line. You know, this bank is just very security conscious, right? They don't want a separate directory in the cloud. They don't want to duplicate identities in the cloud. They don't trust these cloud providers, right? They want to be in control over security and identity, right? And they're leveraging Centrify's cloud platform, brokering to their on-prem Active Directory to deliver on those, you know, security requirements. So again, you can use this. I mean, a lot of customers are. We probably have a separate session just on this, right? But basically, they are either extending their on-prem Active Directory to the cloud. And remember, it's not just one AWS account. Even if it's just AWS, it's 5, 6, 10, 15 AWS accounts, right? So now you're exposing your ID to those different accounts, right? So throw Azure there. Microsoft will basically force you to replicate your on-prem AD out to their cloud, Azure Active Directory. A lot of customers don't want to do that. If you can find those customers, Centrify just provides a ton of value, right, for them. This is what Credit Suisse is going to do. Sean was mentioning a customer we're picking up a POC with. In the short term, that does not want to replicate their identities to the cloud, right? You know, if you can find those kinds of customers, right? If you can explain that, doing that is not a good security practice. It's a lot of work. It's very risky. And Centrify can help, right? You know, true differentiation there, because they can keep their directory on-prem and use our cloud platform as a broker to the on-prem AD, right? So literally a lot of customers have now 4 or 5 directories in the cloud because they're moving workloads to the cloud. There still needs to be a place to manage identities. So, you know, these folks obviously, you know, consolidating solution from one vendor, managing human and privileged account access, right? So hopefully you can kind of see this as a theme, right? All these use cases, right? From JP Morgan Chase, from TD Ameritrade, from Credit Suisse, right? And it doesn't matter, right? It's going to be the same solution regardless, right? Regardless of cloud, you know, cloud vendor, provider, on-prem cloud, multi-cloud, whatever, right? It doesn't matter. I mean, these are the key messages you should be delivering to your customers. Questions?
By the way, like Credit Suisse, Fidelity, JP, we can go on and on about, the client base that we have brought on board at Centrify. It didn't happen on one meeting, right? It was, you gotta get
10,000.
that first meeting, you were getting them to trust us, right? And then it's, we get a little further, we ask a lot of questions, right? And all of a sudden you have, like, people are like, I only thought you were an AD Bridge solution. That's always the assumption that we're just an AD Bridge company, that's all we are. If you ask that question, they go, yeah, we thought that was what all you guys did. And then when you start breaking it down and spending some time, that's why we say, ask for the 90, maybe 2 hours, because you can get into this, or break it up and, and you can get into some of these topics, right? So hopefully these use cases open your eyes to the bigger picture.
Yeah, and again, I mean, a lot of this, other vendors will show up to briefings and it'd be very difficult for them to demo things on the fly. The way that things are done here is we can spin up an AWS machine on the fly at a customer site and show them how we can apply security right away. We can spin up a container. Here, brand new container, launching it, boom, it's secure, it's Centrify, right? It's like literally we could show these things on the fly live, whereas you should be able to do that, if they've been here for a bit. All these demo scripts are published in Confluence and whatnot, right? They should be practicing these things, but essentially, I felt that goes a long way in these briefings. So instead of just a bunch of conversations, right? Let me spin up a container, boom, here you go. Let me spin up an AWS machine, boom, right? I mean, that just delivers a ton of value on site at the customer. And very, very few vendors will be able to do something like that.
Nobody's never been not impressed
Yeah.
with that AWS. When you show that AWS script, like even the biggest stump the chump asshole in the room,
Right.
like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, now with the freemium, it's like, hey, let me spin up a free
Yeah.
vault
I
in
mean,
10
we
minutes.
even have it where there's auto scaling groups in the lab, and you can just say, okay, I want 5 machines, right? There's 2 right now, it spins up the other 3, they're all secure, right? So, definitely that drives a lot. So, I had a comment last slide here, AWS competitive, right? And obviously AWS is really building an ecosystem to allow customers to consume more and more and more of their services and lock them in. I mean, that's the bottom line, right? AWS wants to lock you in, right? That's why they offer you Prime, right? Oh, I have AWS Prime, Amazon Prime, I'm not gonna go shop at Walmart, right? Same thing here, right? If I provide all of the security services to make you feel comfortable with using AWS, you're not gonna go to Azure, right? You're gonna consume more and more AWS services, right? So if a customer, most customers are going to want to leverage what's native with the vendor, right? That's just human nature. So of particular interest is this thing called Systems Manager from AWS, right? And kind of how does it compare with us, or how does it compete? We can, have a separate session to go into a lot deeper, but in summary, provide basically 2 capabilities that sort of compete with what we do. One of them is providing people with access to machines. The other one is basically kind of runs tasks on these machines, right? So you could say, run these 5 commands on these machines, for example, right? And it will do them for you. It's difficult to compete, right? Honestly, the customer's just using AWS, right? It's going to be hard. There are differentiators, right? It's not a password ball. Remote access capability for us is just a little simpler, a lot easier. We tie everything back to the individual, right, with our platform, right? So there are some differentiators there, but it can be difficult to compete if the customer's purely with AWS, right? Your best play, again, is just the theme of the session, right? Is just vendor agnostic. Do you really want to lock in, right, all your workloads with AWS, Mr. Customer, right? We're finding, here's a study, right? 69% of customers have a hybrid cloud, right? I know you maybe just have AWS today, but if you do plan, if you do move to Azure, if you do move to Google, you won't be able to make that transition very easy for you. Why don't you go with a cloud agnostic vendor like Centrify instead? At least take a look, right?
You know what's valuable?
Concept.
When you're sitting in front of obviously, we're very lucky to have JP, Credit Suisse, TD Ameritrade, like these big companies that are sort of on the front end because they have to build it more secure. They got the big, they have a very large checkbook to write checks for software like us. And then the ones that are sort of behind him, it's almost like you're older, you want to raise your older son the right way because the other 2 or 3 are going to follow him, right? You go into those smaller accounts and then you tell the story. They're not really there yet with the hybrid, and they're sort of taking copious notes on, right? This is good because we're going there, or they're not there yet. So you're sort of educating and getting them to sort of buy into what Fel just showed there. But again, you can get credit. We have somebody at Credit Suisse that will get on the phone. TD Ameritrade will get on the phone. You have somebody at JP. These guys will 3 or 4 times a year get on the phone and they will vouch for what we just said. You know, and they're going to hear it from the end user. You know, Fel and I used to have these meetings at the Cornell Club where we would have, you know, go in there and talk about a certain topic. And we'd have all these customers that were there. By the way, we would go there. We got Eric Shafto from AIG, you know, sitting there at the table, and he was like, and we introduced everybody, and they said who they were, and then he goes, well, I'm a prospect, you know, and they got to hear, you know, what these guys love about Centrify, and Eric walked out going, I'm buying, right? And so you guys, it's an open book. You guys can do this stuff in your given territories. Get creative. We're still making it up as we go along. You know, tell these stories. You know, they're going in this direction, and we have a really rich story to tell.
Good. I mean, that's all I have for you guys. Obviously, we could talk about other things, questions, scenarios that have come up, and you know, as a group, we can try to address it. But you know, hopefully, this was helpful for you. You know, like I said, maybe some takeaways, right? Is maybe, you know, Wade or Kurt or Doug, whoever wants to lead this. But I do think we have come up with a few key wins, right, in a couple of these different scenarios. Just make sure, you know, the sales guys can properly tell those stories, right? You know, I mean, I just don't think we do that enough here. And I think that's the way you can really help sell, right? I think people kind of know their own customers and their own stories a little bit, but especially if you're new to Centrify, right? I mean, I think that's really what's gonna take you to the next level.
It's not easy to like get the meeting with 8 to 10 people in a room with all these different demographics. And you walk in, it's like we have a room like this, and there's 8 people sitting there, and the Unix, Linux, security, the cloud teams, and it's like they're all, you know. And it was that pre-sales call that you kind of told some of these stories, and you would give them a reason why you want to invite. You know, I always go back to this. We're all sincere people. That's why we can get meetings. But when you're competent, like carrying some of this dialogue, it brings a whole other audience to the meeting. You know, your first impression is that much greater, right? And that goes to the DSEs. You guys are, you know, you guys are the big show, right? You show up and you can't demo some of this stuff, right? You know, Fel would be, I told you yesterday, Fel would be up until midnight watching the game, just making sure that the demo was exactly right for the next day, that everything worked, because the first impression was everything. You know, he wanted to walk away, we did, wowing the end user going, holy cow, I really thought it was an AD bridge solution. It's so much more. All right, and then that wow is, you know, you're now top of mind, take it to an eval, you know, they get more excited. Now they're using it in their environment, they see the names of their systems, go in, now re-demo to the same audience, but with their server names, right? And now it's a wow again, and now there's some questions they're gonna ask because they forgot to ask the first time. And now they can see themselves using it because it's in front of them. And all of a sudden, we sell it to them. You know, it's the magic, right? The sales magic that goes on when you have an amazing product, right, like this. But it's so darn technical, you have to sort of ask a lot of questions, right? Rhetorical questions. You know what the answer is going to be, right? And then when they give you the answer, you know, write it down. Don't blurt it out. And then you're building your story, and all of a sudden, now the engineer, you know, goes to demo, and he's going to show all this nice workflow based on the questions that we sort of expose on the problems. You're going to expose problems in anything they had. You know, oh yeah, we do have that, and well, that is going to be a problem for us. We're not even here to talk about that, but thanks for reminding me of that, right? It's not easy. It's not easy, right? But this was an invaluable session, Fel. I'm so glad we recorded it because I'm going to listen to it over and over again, and I hope everybody else does.
Any other questions, comments, any things you guys are seeing in the field, on the phone? Anything you guys want to bring up?
I think it's important to note, if you don't mind, me talking again. So we have to respect, Fel's in a new job, right? We don't want to ever damage his reputation at his new job at Com, right? So it's very, in this room, right, it really can't be shared with anybody else that, you know, keep it light, right? We're using Fel in his off hours, he took a day off today to help us, right? Because again, this is his family, right? And Fel will be around this quarter, next quarter. We're trying for, to use him on trainings, once in a while, an end user, right? But we gotta be super careful on that. That sort of can't get out. But I want you guys to respect, right? If he can't help, right, there's a good reason. But if he can, he will definitely do it, right? He's all in to help me, and we're compensating him for that.
Yeah, just so that there's an email, sc.lead@simplify.com, so send an email there, questions. I mean, Sean sent me, hey, a customer wants to do this or that and whatnot, how do you, well, how would you answer it, or, because again, the guys are, I was subject for 12 years, so, been around for a long time, so, yeah, feel free to send those, questions there. Happy to answer them, the night, weekends, things like that, and I want you guys to be successful, if you want to do help, let me know, I really care about this place and you guys, so, usually like to help. Cool. Anything else?
Thanks, Doc.
Questions?
No, thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. That was helpful.